My name is Linda Morgan, and for 20 years I believed I was building a life with my husband, Richard. I cooked his meals, folded his laundry, reminded him of every doctor's appointment, and held his hand through every hospital visit. People used to tell me I was a devoted wife. I used to believe that too. I thought that love meant showing up, being there in sickness and in health, even when it hurt. I didn't realize until much later that there's a difference between devotion and self-erasure. Everything shifted on a warm Thursday morning in late spring. Richard was recovering from a mild stroke and still in the hospital. I'd gotten up early like I always did and baked his favorite oatmeal muffins. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the kitchen. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, packed the muffins into a paper bag, and made sure I grabbed his reading glasses off the nightstand. He always forgot them, and I didn't want him to feel unsettled. I wanted the day to feel normal for him, familiar. Like home was still close. When I got to the hospital, a nurse told me he had gone down to the courtyard to get some fresh air. I smiled politely, thanked her, and headed in that direction, expecting to find him sitting quietly, maybe watching the birds. But before I even saw him, I heard his voice clear as day, talking to someone. Another patient, I guessed, maybe the man in the bed next to his. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was just rounding the corner when I heard him laugh and say, "She's nothing but a free caregiver." Honestly, I hit the jackpot. She cooks, she cleans, she keeps track of my meds. I don't pay a dime. I stopped dead in my tracks. At first I thought maybe I heard wrong. Maybe he was joking. But then he added, still chuckling, "And the money's going to my son, of course. She thinks we've got a great relationship, but when I'm gone, she can go stay with her daughter. Won't be my problem." That moment felt like a punch to the gut. I froze behind the corner wall, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. It was like the floor cracked open beneath me. Suddenly, every memory, the quiet dinners, the sleepless nights spent next to his hospital bed, the way I used to place his slippers by the bed in the morning, flashed through my mind like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit. Had it all been fake? Had I built an entire life out of someone else's convenience? I didn't cry. Not right then. I turned away, slow and quiet like a ghost, and walked back down the hallway, gripping that little paper bag of muffins, like it was the last thing tethering me to sanity. I felt numb. Like I had just walked out of a play I didn't know I was performing in. And suddenly all the roles I had taken on wife, nurse, cook, caretaker felt cheap, transactional. Not love, just labor. When I got home that evening, the house felt colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The late afternoon sun was pouring through the living room window, like it always did. But it didn't warm a thing. I left the lights off and sat down on the couch, still wearing my jacket keys in my hand. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat there staring at the wall, feeling more like a visitor than someone who lived there. That house was never really mine. Richard had shared it with his first wife. He had picked out the wallpaper in the hallway with her, bought the furniture, decided where the shelves went. When we got married, I suggested we move somewhere new, start fresh. He waved me off. "Dylan's used to this house," he said. "No need to stir things up." Dylan, his son. He was already 15 when I moved in. A head taller than me, full of teenage silence and disapproval. He never called me Mom. Heck, he barely said my name without a cold edge to it. I remember the day I moved in, arriving with 2 small cardboard boxes, one with books, the other with kitchen supplies. I spent 3 days scrubbing grease off the stove, trying to make the place shine, thinking maybe if I worked hard enough, I'd be accepted. I wanted to be useful. I thought that was the key. Back then, I still had a job at the local library. I'd come home tired with grocery bags in my hands and start dinner like clockwork. On our first Thanksgiving together, I cooked everything from scratch turkey homemade stuffing cranberry sauce. Dylan took one bite of the gravy and muttered, "Tastes weird. My mum's was better." I remember standing there still holding the serving spoon, wondering why my chest ached the way it did. That was probably the first time I began to disappear. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. But that moment in the hospital courtyard, that's when the final veil lifted. That's when I knew I hadn't been protecting a marriage. I had been clinging to a role I thought I had to play, and something inside me, something small and silent that I had buried deep, finally stirred awake. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was love, because it wasn't, and maybe it never had been. It's strange how you can lose yourself without ever realizing it's happening. There's no big explosion, no announcement. You just slowly get quieter, smaller, more tired. And then one day you look in the mirror and wonder where you went. That's how it was for me. I didn't vanish all at once. I faded like a photograph left in the sun too long. I remember the early days with Richard, back when I still believed we were building something new together. He had been widowed for a few years. His first wife passed from cancer, and the grief was still fresh when we met. I thought I was helping him heal. I didn't mind the fact that the house was full of memories that didn't include me, at least not at first. The wallpaper in the hallway, the worn recliner in the den, the family photos where I didn't exist. I told myself those were just things. The important part was that I was there now, ready to create new memories with him. But any time I suggested changing something, even something small, Richard would shake his head. "Dylan's used to it," he'd say. Or, "This is how it's always been." He didn't say it to be mean. He said it like it was obvious. Like I should understand that my presence didn't mean change, it just meant adjustment. On my end. Dylan was a whole other story. He was 15 when I moved in, already tall, quiet, and difficult to read. I tried. God knows I tried. I made his favorite meals after school, asked about his classes, offered to help him study. He never told me to go away, but he never let me in either. He called me Linda, always, with a clipped tone, like I was a guest overstaying her welcome. I remember once I baked a batch of cookies and left them on the counter with a little note. He walked right past them without saying a word. Later, I found the note in the trash, not ripped or crumpled, just discarded. There was a moment, Thanksgiving, maybe 3 years in, when I thought things might finally turn a corner. I had cooked for 2 days straight. Turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing everything from scratch. I wanted to impress them. I wanted to feel like I belonged. We sat down to eat, and I remember looking around the table thinking maybe this year would be different. Then Dylan poked at the gravy and said, "This tastes weird. My mum's was better." I stood there holding the serving spoon, my hands shaking just slightly, and I smiled. I actually smiled. I laughed it off like it didn't matter. And I remember thinking right then that something inside me had quietly cracked. Looking back, that was probably the moment I started pulling back, not on the outside, but inside. I didn't stop cooking or cleaning or trying to keep things running. But I stopped expecting anything in return. No thank yous, no appreciation, no real connection. I just did what needed to be done, because that's what I thought being a good wife meant. I thought I was helping hold the family together. When Richard lost his job during a company downsizing, I stepped in. I filled out the unemployment forms, called the insurance company, renegotiated the mortgage. He barely said a word, just moped around the house in his robe, mourning the loss of his job title. I didn't blame him, but he never once asked how I was doing. Not once. I picked up extra hours at the library, made sure the bills got paid, and let him sit in silence on the porch for hours. Then his ex-wife passed away. It was sudden. He sobbed for what felt like forever, clutching an old photo of her on the porch swing. I sat beside him and held his hand. I brought him tea. I told him to take all the time he needed. And again, he never asked how I felt. Not even a glance to check in. It was like I didn't exist in those moments, just the vessel bringing comfort. When Dylan dropped out of college after 1 year, Richard took it hard. He paced the kitchen floor late into the night, muttering to himself about wasted potential. 2 days later, I offered to pay off Dylan's credit card debt using part of my retirement savings. I thought it would relieve some stress. I thought it would help. Richard thanked me once flatly, then went right back to stewing over Dylan's future. The weight of that moment settled into my chest and never really left. I can't tell you how many weekends I spent pretending to enjoy things I hated. Golf, for one. I bought a visor and those stiff white sneakers just to walk the course with Richard, even though the whole time I was bored out of my mind. I sat through endless family reunions where I was introduced as a friend of the family. I'll never forget the time he said that at his niece's wedding. "This is Linda. She's a friend of the family, not his wife, not even his partner. Just someone vaguely connected." I laughed, of course. I always laughed. Then I went outside, sat alone in the car, and bit the inside of my cheek to stop the tears. But I still came home and made dinner. Every single time. It was like I was living in the background of someone else's life. I wasn't a partner. I was support staff. Invisible, except when something needed to be done. And I had convinced myself that this was normal, that marriage meant compromise, that it was noble to be the one holding it all together, even when no one asked if you were okay. But the truth is, I wasn't okay. I hadn't been for a long time. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I was carrying everything, his grief, his disappointments, his life without anyone carrying me. And I thought if I just tried harder, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe Richard would thank me. Maybe Dylan would soften. But they never did. Because I had taught them that I didn't need anything, that I would always be there no matter what. And slowly, piece by piece, I stopped being a person. I became the wallpaper. A few days after Richard was discharged from the hospital, I found myself alone in the study, sorting through the filing cabinet like I always did. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels more like absence than peace. The only sounds were the soft ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator down the hallway. I didn't have a plan that day. I just knew there were medical bills to organize, follow-up appointments to confirm, and prescriptions to reorder. It was part of the routine. I didn't think about it much. Caring for Richard had become second nature, like brushing my teeth or tying my shoes. He kept everything meticulously organized. Blue folders for medical, red for banking, yellow for insurance. I used to think it was impressive how structured he was. Now it just felt sterile, like everything had its place except me. As I flipped through the yellow folder marked insurance, a single page slipped out and floated to the floor. I reached down and picked it up without thinking. Just paper, I figured. Some renewal notice or coverage update. But the heading stopped me. Life insurance policy. Updated. My stomach dropped a little, but I kept reading. At first, nothing seemed off. It listed Richard as the policyholder. The coverage amount was the same as the last time I remembered seeing it. But then my eyes landed on the line that listed the beneficiaries. Primary beneficiary 1, Dylan Morgan. Primary beneficiary 2, Margaret Morgan. Deceased. No mention of me, no secondary, not even a footnote. It was like I didn't exist. I just stood there holding the paper, staring at that list of names. It felt like someone had slapped me across the face and then walked away without a word. It wasn't about the money. God knows I didn't marry Richard for that. But after 20 years of showing up, of handling everything, of being there through every damn thing, I had assumed naively that somewhere in some legal line or fine print I'd matter, that someone would have thought to include me. But he hadn't. He had updated this policy recently, clearly after Margaret passed, and still didn't add me. And in that moment, something in me froze. This man had planned for everything for his son, for his legacy, for the assets, but not for me. Not even a placeholder. I wasn't part of his future, even in death. I sat down slowly, the page trembling in my hand. My heart was pounding, but the rest of me felt completely numb. It was like all the invisible work I'd done, tracking prescriptions, arguing with insurance companies, managing our taxes, cooking meals he never thanked me for, had suddenly become a list of exhibits in a trial I didn't even know I was in. And the verdict was already decided. I didn't count. I had never counted. I sat there a long time staring at the name Dylan Morgan, typed neatly in bold print. The same boy who never once acknowledged me as anything more than a nuisance. The same boy who tossed my kindness aside like junk mail. And yet he was the one Richard saw as worthy. He was the one who would be remembered, rewarded. And me, I was the one who made the phone calls when Richard had his panic attacks. I was the one who wiped down the kitchen counters when he was too tired to lift a sponge. I was the one who pulled weeds in the yard because he liked the lawn looking presentable. I did it all without ever being asked, because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought it would be noticed. I thought eventually it would be enough. But looking at that paper, it hit me all at once. It wasn't. It never had been. And Richard organised, pragmatic, emotionless. Richard had made it crystal clear, in black and white. I was useful, but not essential. I was there, but not seen. I folded the paper neatly and placed it back into the yellow folder. I didn't tear it. I didn't scream. That wasn't how I broke. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of break that sounds like nothing on the outside but feels like thunder on the inside. It was the moment I realized I had been patching up someone else's life for 2 decades without even the courtesy of being included in the emergency plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I kept replaying Richard's voice in that hospital courtyard, the sound of his laughter when he said I was just a caregiver. I kept seeing my name missing from that policy. My mind was a loop of moments, tiny ones that used to feel like nothing but suddenly meant everything. All the times he forgot my birthday. All the times he said you're overreacting when I tried to talk about my feelings. All the family photos where I was always off to the side, smiling like a guest. By sunrise, I had made a cup of coffee. I didn't even drink. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. That's when I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a number I hadn't dialed in months. Caroline Davis. The closest thing I had to a real friend. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Caroline's flowers. Her voice was warm, upbeat, familiar. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I just said, "Hey, it's me." She paused for half a second. "Linda, honey, are you okay?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Not at first. She didn't push. "Where are you right now?" she asked, soft and steady. "Just come. You don't have to explain anything." 25 minutes later, I was standing in the doorway of her flower shop, and for the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw me. Walking into Caroline's flower shop felt like stepping into a different world. The air was warm and sweet, full of lavender sunflowers and the faint scent of eucalyptus. There was a chalkboard by the register with a message scribbled in white chalk, "Today's flower. You don't owe anyone your silence." I stood there reading those words, feeling like they had been written just for me. When Caroline saw me, she didn't ask any questions. She just came around the counter and wrapped her arms around me, holding on tight, like she knew exactly how close I was to falling apart. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, but when she hugged me, something inside gave way. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that ran down my cheeks while I stood in the middle of her shop, with my hands still gripping the strap of my purse. She led me through the back of the store, past the shelves of dried herbs and mason jars, and out to a little patio. There were 2 wooden chairs tucked into the corner near a climbing rose bush. We sat down, and I started to talk. I told her everything. About the muffins I baked that morning, about hearing Richard's voice in the courtyard, the things he said. I told her about the life insurance policy and how my name wasn't even on it. I told her about the years of doing everything for a man who never really saw me. And she just listened. No interruptions, no gasps, no advice. Just her presence. I hadn't realized how much I needed that until it was happening. When I finally stopped talking, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Linda, you weren't his wife. You were his unpaid labor. He used you, and you let him because you're kind. But kindness doesn't mean staying in a cage just because someone left the door open." I sat still, those words settling into me like stones in a pond. She was right. That door had been open for a long time. I just hadn't seen it. Or maybe I had. I just didn't think I was allowed to walk through it. I was so used to thinking that leaving would make me selfish, ungrateful. But maybe staying had been the bigger betrayal. Not to Richard, but to myself. When I got home that evening, I didn't move like someone fueled by rage. I didn't tear through drawers or throw clothes into bags. It wasn't like that. It was calm. Quiet. I knew what I had to do. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out a small suitcase and opened it on the bed. I packed only what I needed: a few changes of clothes, some personal papers, my laptop, and a photo of Melissa, my daughter, from my first marriage. It was a picture of her from college, standing in front of her little off-campus apartment, with her arms wide open, and that huge smile she always had when she was proud of herself. I tucked it between 2 sweaters. Richard was napping in the den with the TV on low. I could hear the sound of some old western playing. He didn't hear the suitcase wheels on the floor. He didn't see me pause at the kitchen table, where I left a folded piece of paper under the salt shaker. It was a signed separation notice prepared by a local attorney I had contacted weeks earlier, back when I first started wondering what it would mean to leave. At the time, it felt like a just-in-case measure. Now it felt like permission. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the guest room at Caroline's apartment above her shop, staring at the ceiling and listening to the pipes hum and groan as the building settled. The apartment was tiny, maybe 400 square feet, but it felt like the first space in years that actually belonged to me. There was a window that looked out over her back garden, and when I opened it, the scent of lemon balm and lilac drifted in with the breeze. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, hands in my lap, and just breathed. That first morning, I made myself coffee and drank it in silence. No one needed anything from me. No one expected me to answer questions or make breakfast. I wasn't performing anymore. I was just being. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like trying to walk after sitting for too long. But it was mine. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and typed something I'd never searched before: freelance editing jobs for retired professionals. It felt awkward at first, like I was trying on shoes that didn't quite fit yet. But within a week, I found a part-time gig copy editing articles for a lifestyle website. The pay wasn't huge, but it was something. More importantly, it came with no strings attached. No emotional labor, no trade-offs. Just work, just me. The first check came a few weeks later, and I remember holding it in my hands and smiling, not because of the amount, but because of what it meant. I earned this. No one gave it to me in exchange for cooking or caregiving or pretending to be okay. I had something that was mine again, my skill, my effort, my value. That night, I made myself dinner roasted squash a small salad and a glass of white wine. I didn't light candles. I didn't set the table for two. I just sat by the window fork in hand and whispered to myself, "You're doing it, Linda. You're really doing it." It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning I never thought I'd get to have. I never thought a small apartment above a flower shop could feel like freedom. The place was barely 400 square feet, with creaky floors, and a bathroom sink that gurgled every time I brushed my teeth. But it was mine. Mine to walk through, without tiptoeing to sit down, without being on call to take a deep breath, without worrying about what someone else needed next. After 20 years of being someone's backup system, that kind of space felt like air after holding my breath for too long. Caroline had done more for me than she probably realized. She didn't just give me a place to stay, she gave me the first quiet I'd had in years. Her upstairs apartment had one west-facing window that looked out over her garden. In the afternoons, the sunlight would spill in and stretch across the wood floor like a golden blanket. I'd sit there sometimes with a cup of tea, watching the breeze move through the rose bushes, and I wouldn't be thinking about dinner or meds or appointments. I'd just be sitting, just being. And in those little moments, something in me began to settle. I started working part-time almost immediately. That editing job I found online wasn't glamorous, mostly lifestyle articles about budgeting tips or ways to declutter your kitchen, but it gave me something that was mine. I could sit in the corner of the room with my laptop and a hot cup of coffee, reviewing sentences, making them cleaner, tighter. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of focused, quiet work, where my mind felt useful, not just busy. The first time the editor emailed me back with a note that said, "Your notes are incredibly precise. Would love to offer you more regular work," I actually smiled. Not because I needed the praise, but because someone noticed something about me. Something I did well. That hadn't happened in a long, long time. There was no one asking what was for dinner. No one muttering under their breath when I forgot something at the store. No one sulking in the living room while I tried to juggle 3 things at once. For the first time in years, I wasn't needed. And at first, I'll admit that was hard. When you've built your whole identity around being the one who holds everything together, the silence can feel like rejection. But it wasn't. It was space. It was possibility. I remember one night in particular. I'd just submitted another round of edits, and it was already dark outside. Caroline was downstairs closing up the shop, and I was alone in the apartment. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't scroll my phone. I just pulled out a small notebook and started writing. Not a journal, not anything fancy. Just thoughts. Things I'd never had time to say out loud. One sentence turned into another, then a paragraph, then a whole page. I found myself writing about women like me, women who had spent so long being everything for everyone else that they forgot who they were. I didn't know where it would lead, but I kept writing. Later that week, I created a little blog. I called it Second Act Stories. Nothing big. Just a space to post reflection stories about resilience, about starting over, about learning to be seen after so long being invisible. I didn't tell anyone at first. I just needed a place to speak in my own voice, to write what I wished someone had told me years ago. I'd make myself dinner most nights, nothing complicated. One night I roasted butternut squash with rosemary and made a salad with goat cheese and walnuts. I poured a glass of chilled Riesling and sat by the window listening to an old jazz record Caroline had gifted me when I moved in. The saxophone filled the room gently, like someone humming a lullaby. And for the first time in, I don't know how long, I ate a meal without any weight attached to it. No pressure to please. No measuring myself against someone else's expectations. Just me enjoying something I made for myself. It wasn't just dinner, it was peace. Caroline would often come upstairs after closing to check in. She never pried, never pushed. but sometimes we'd sit out on the little back porch sipping tea while she trimmed her roses. She'd ask, "How are you holding up?" and I'd answer honestly. Some days I felt strong. Other days I felt like I was starting from scratch with no map. But I always felt safe, and that made all the difference. It was during one of those quiet evenings that I got a call from Melissa. I hadn't told her everything yet, but she could tell something had shifted. "Mum," she said gently, "you sound different." I didn't even know what to say. I just whispered, "I feel different." There was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "Come visit me. Stay as long as you want." And just like that, I felt something settle in my chest. Hope. Not the desperate kind, the steady, grounding kind. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was slowly learning how to live again. I booked a flight to Boston 2 days later. Flying to Boston felt surreal. I hadn't been on a plane in years. As we took off, I stared out the window, watching the ground shrink beneath me, and thought about everything I'd left behind. The house, the routines, the constant tension I used to pretend wasn't there. For the first time, I was going towards something, not just running away. That small carry-on suitcase held more than clothes. It carried a quiet kind of hope I hadn't felt in decades. Melissa met me at the gate, her arms already open before I even cleared the walkway. She hugged me so tightly, like she knew I needed something solid to hold on to. "You don't look well," she whispered. I smiled the best I could and said I've been better. That evening we sat in her cozy little kitchen, eating pumpkin soup and warm bread, and I told her everything. From the hospital courtyard to the insurance policy, the years of being slowly erased, and the way I'd finally stepped out of that life. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. Her eyes shimmered, and her jaw was tight with anger. When I finished, she pushed her bowl aside and said, "We need to talk to a lawyer. You deserve more than a quiet exit. You deserve justice." That word justice hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't let myself think in those terms. I was just relieved to be out. But Melissa was right. I had given 20 years of unpaid care, emotional labor, and financial support to a man who hadn't even acknowledged me on paper. I wasn't asking for revenge. I just wanted to be counted. A few days later, we met with Karen Whitman, a divorce attorney in her 50s, with kind eyes and a calm, professional presence. Her office was tucked above a second-hand bookstore that smelled like old pages and fresh coffee. I liked her immediately. She took her time going over my paperwork, our marriage certificate, bank accounts, Richard's retirement statements. She didn't rush. When she finally looked up, she said something that surprised me. "Linda, under California law, you're entitled to a share of the marital assets and spousal support. You gave 2 decades of unpaid care. That matters." I blinked. No one had ever said that to me before. That I mattered. That the work I did, quiet behind the scenes, everyday work, had real value in the eyes of the law. Karen continued, "This isn't about punishing him. It's about restoring what's owed to you." We filed the paperwork that week. Richard was served the following Monday. He only called me once after that. His voice was thin and tight, like he couldn't quite believe I was serious. "You really want to drag this through court?" he asked. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, "No. I want what I earned." The court process was quicker than I expected. Richard didn't have much of a defense. What hurt more than anything was learning during discovery that he had transferred a large portion of his assets to Dylan just the year before. He was trying to hide it, to make sure everything went to his son. The judge didn't appreciate that. The final ruling awarded me 1/3 of our marital assets, including investment returns, and $2,500 a month in spousal support for 2 years. It wasn't a windfall. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about being seen, being recognized. And when the ruling came down, I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. But I did feel something shift inside me. Something in my spine straightened. I had stood up for myself, and the world hadn't ended. 2 weeks after the ruling, I received a letter from the hospital. Richard had suffered a hypertensive crisis and was in the ICU. The hospital needed a family member to approve long-term care arrangements. There was no one on file. No one had signed the documents. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been the one to sign everything for years. The emergency contact, the prescription releases, the power of attorney. All of it. I sat at Caroline's kitchen table, holding that letter, staring at the printed words. Richard had walked into court, full of swagger, confident he still had control. But when the judge handed down the ruling, something must have cracked. Because to him, money wasn't just comfort, it was identity. It was power. And now, with a third of it gone, and me no longer waiting on him hand and foot, he had nothing left to lean on. I didn't call the hospital. I didn't visit. Instead, I called Karen and asked her to transfer all legal care authority to Dylan. She called me back the next day. "It's done," she said. But Dylan's refusing to respond. The hospital says he's not cooperating. I wasn't surprised. Dylan, like his father, only showed loyalty when there was something in it for him. The moment he realized half the estate was no longer his interest vanished. Later that night, while trimming roses out back, Caroline looked up from her clippers and said quietly, "I saw something Dylan posted online." She hesitated. He wrote, "Dragging around debt and refusing to die is selfish. At least a quick death gets you insurance money." I didn't react. I just nodded. In that moment, I understood something that had always been buried under the surface. Richard's biggest fear wasn't illness. It wasn't even death. It was being forgotten. It was no longer being served. And now, with his health failing and no one at his bedside, the truth was plain. He had given everything to Dylan. And Dylan had already moved on. And me, I had finally moved on too. But not out of spite. Out of love for myself. Caroline's apartment above the flower shop wasn't fancy, not even close. The floors creaked every time I got up for tea in the middle of the night, and the pipes made these strange, groaning sounds like the building was sighing with me. But it was peaceful. It was mine. The twin bed against the wall was small, but I slept better there than I had in years. There was a little window facing west that overlooked the garden, and every afternoon the sunlight spilled in across the hardwood like warm honey. Sometimes I'd just sit on the floor with a cup of tea. No music, no phone, just the hum of the world outside. It felt quiet in a way that didn't scare me anymore. It felt like stillness, not emptiness. I had always thought that walking away from a marriage would feel like failure. For so long, I believed leaving meant I hadn't tried hard enough or loved deep enough. But it turned out staying had been the real heartbreak, because every year I stayed, I chipped away a little more of who I was hoping someone else would notice. Now I was finally learning to pay attention to myself. I spent my days copy-editing content for that lifestyle site articles about organizing your home, finding time for hobbies, little wellness tips. The work wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. There was something comforting about taking messy, scattered words and giving them shape. It made me feel like I was putting things in order again, one sentence at a time. The editor emailed me regularly now, offering more work. "Your edits are precise and thoughtful," she wrote. "Would you consider more regular assignments?" I smiled when I read that. Not because it meant more income, but because it meant someone out there saw value in what I did. No strings, no exchange, just value. One night, after wrapping up a project, I made myself dinner roasted squash with rosemary, a simple salad with goat cheese and walnuts, and a glass of chilled Riesling. I didn't set the table for two. I didn't light a candle to make it look pretty. I just sat by the window, jazz playing low from the Bluetooth speaker Caroline had given me, and I ate, slowly, peacefully. There was no one to impress, no one to serve. Just me eating food I liked in a space that belonged to me. It was such a small thing, but I caught myself whispering, "You're doing it, Linda. You're really doing it." After a few weeks of settling into this new rhythm, I got a call from Melissa. "You've got to come back out here," she said. "The garden's in bloom, and I made brownies." That was her way of saying, "I miss you. I want you close." I flew out 2 days later with the same little suitcase and something else tucked away with it, a quiet kind of confidence, the kind that didn't ask for permission anymore. Melissa met me at the gate again, holding a small brown bag with a sticker that read, "Congrats, Mom, on being reborn." We laughed like kids, real laughter, the kind that fills a space and makes it feel alive. When we got to her cottage, she stood in the doorway looking around and said, "You look different." I didn't know how to respond. I just smiled and said I feel different. That night we sat in her living room with mugs of peppermint tea, and I told her what it had been like, really like living in Richard's house. Not just the big moments, but the little humiliations. The times I was introduced as a friend of the family, the birthdays he forgot the way he handed over decisions to Dylan as if I were just passing through. Melissa didn't interrupt. She just listened. Her eyes were soft but fierce. She pulled out a stack of papers from her office, a few case studies she'd been reviewing at work. Stories of women who left long marriages and started over. She flipped to one and pointed to a highlighted line that read, "At any age, the decision to stop being agreeable is an act of bravery. But true victory is becoming your full self without needing anyone's permission." I read it twice, then again, and I whispered, "I think I finally understand what that means." Later that week, we went to a local flea market and found a small wooden plaque. It was simple, carved by hand, and it said, "Linda's Space Quiet, Curious Free." I didn't even hesitate. I bought it and told Melissa I'd hang it above my desk when I got back. She nodded and said, "That's exactly who you are now." On my last night in Boston, we sat out in her garden helping Caroline, who had flown out to visit for a few days, label new flower arrangements. I picked one for the center shelf and wrote on the tag, "Gratitude Rose." Melissa laughed, teasing, "That's a bit cheesy, isn't it?" I shrugged. "It's a late bloomer," I said, "but it's strong and steady." After dinner, I opened my laptop to post a new entry on Second Act Stories, the little blog I'd started back in the apartment. The draft title read, "From Being Needed to Being Seen." The words came slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I had so much to say, and I wanted to say it right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't telling someone else's story. I was telling my own. When I returned to Caroline's loft, things looked the same. The chipped paint on the stairwell, the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of cut stems and earth from downstairs. But something had shifted in me. I walked in, took off my shoes, and hung the little plaque on the wall. Linda's space. Not Richard's house. Not Dylan's silence. Just mine. Later that evening, I stood at the front door of the flower shop. The string lights Caroline had hung twinkled above me, and the soft chime of wind bells played in the breeze. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. I stood there, not as a wife, not as a caregiver, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as Linda Morgan, a woman with her own name, her own voice, and finally her own life. If someone had been watching me at that moment, they might have thought I was just standing there looking out at the garden. But I wasn't. I was standing in my truth. To anyone reading this, wherever you are not too late. And you have never, not once, been invisible. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for sitting with my story, and maybe even seeing parts of yourself in it. Leaving wasn't easy. Starting over was terrifying. But choosing myself after years of putting everyone else first was the most loving thing I've ever done. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I'm just here to remind you that your story matters, your voice matters, and it is never ever too late to begin again. If something in this resonated with you, I'd love for you to be part of this growing space we're creating together. Please like this video, subscribe for more stories like mine, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And in the comments, tell me, what's one thing you've done just for yourself lately? No judgment, just honesty and maybe a little community. Because healing doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we speak, when we're heard, and when we remind each other that starting over isn't failure, it's courage in motion. You're not invisible. You never were. Let's keep reminding each other of that. I'll see you in the next one.